He begins with delight and ends in wisdom. When he writes about the young boys of the birches, the young naughty boys who climb the tall birch trees to the very top, experiencing the pure delight of climbing to the very top and the joy of swinging down from the heights, bending the tall, slim trees as far as the ground. When the boys come swinging up from the top right to the ground from where they jump off, the bent birches have been bent due to ice storms. Robert Frost knows that. The poet knows that. But these violent ice storms do not take away the mystery, the notes, the tones of imagination which the poet reserves for convincing himself that, keeping scientific knowledge aside, he prefers to think that the birches have been bent not because of the ice storms, but because of the action of the boys, the swinging action of the boys that have given them the pure delight that they needed in this mundane world. He also hopes to believe, wishes to believe, that the boys have actually come here to experience the takeoff, the momentary escape from the cares and worries of this world. They want to recapture the joy, the pure, uninhibited joy of taking off away from this world. A momentary escape. This is Robert Frost, the American poet from New England, who was born in 1874 and wrote until 1963. The 1914 poem, After Apple Picking, appears in Frost's anthology called North of Boston, published 1914. It is yet another characteristic Frostian poem, which shows Frost's paint a landscape for us. This poem takes us to nature and its beauty. A village, a rural scene, an apple orchard, a garden. Well, you see lots of apple trees laden with the red, crimson-colored fruit, just waiting to be picked. We see our apple picker standing on a 2-point ladder that is placed against one of the trees. He has been picking, obviously, picking apples right from morning. There is a barrel that hasn't yet been filled. He's tired after the marathon effort of picking apples. He's drowsing off. This is the picture that Robert Frost presents before us. The title is After Apple Picking. So, this poem that speaks about apple picking, that introduces us yet once again to the beloved landscape that Robert Frost has reserved for many of his poems, New England, is a poem that speaks about, once again, about man's association with nature, close association with nature. As is typical of Frostian poems, this poem too speaks a lot or tries to speak about tries to introduce us to the facets, the different facets of man's existence. How man has in constant companionship with nature, has yet a lot of cares and worries, has a lot of things to achieve, to attain, is tired after this race, after a race behind progress, the race behind achieving things. And to bring this to our notice through the medium of joy, through the medium of nature, through the medium of something that penetrates into the mind of the reader, is what Robert Frost has attempted to do. Let's look into the poem. We'll begin by reading the poem. The poem will be put in the description box. You can access it from there. For now, for this class, we'll be reading the poem and explaining it to you. After Apple Picking by Robert Frost. My long two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it. And there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough, but I'm done with apple picking now. This is the picture that we get. We see, just imagine an orchard. Orchard is a kind of a garden that is filled with apple trees. There might be other trees in between, but apple trees are the major occupants of that orchard. So it's an apple orchard. You have this speaker who could be the poet, who could be the narrator. He is an apple picker, a person who is picking apples. And you find this apple picker in the middle of this orchard speaking about what he has been doing right from the beginning or the break of day. He is talking about the barrels of, when he talks about a barrel that he didn't fill, it is obvious that he has filled a lot of other barrels. So there you can imagine the apple trees in the orchard. You can imagine a lot of barrels filled with the red, crimson colored. Crimson is a dark shade of red. Of course, you know what the apple looks like, the color of the apples. Well, so this could be a better color because you pluck it straight off the trees. So it would be the freshest, juiciest, and the reddest variety of apples that you can imagine. So imagine this orchard with a lot of apple trees, with this man standing somewhere around filling barrels with these apples. And he speaks about a barrel that he didn't fill. He speaks about the 2-point ladder. You've seen ladders, right? Ladders, the 2-point ladder would obviously be the ladder that we all use. We all are very familiar with in our homes. So this is the 2-point ladder, and you find him, resting the ladder against the trees. And he says there could be a bough or two, a branch or two of the apple trees that still contain the apples that he didn't see, that he missed out while plucking or picking the apples. And the last line of that stanza goes, but I'm done with apple picking now. He has completed his task for the day. We go on to the second stanza. Essence of winter sleep is on the night, the scent of apples I'm drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough, and held against the world of hoary grass. Essence of winter sleep is on the night, the scent of apples I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough, and held against the world of hoary grass. Look at the atmosphere that the poet creates for you. We spoke about the poem is written at the end of autumn. What the poet, the atmosphere, the picture that the poet wants to create for you is the end of autumn and the beginning of winter. Autumn is taking its last few steps and winter is at entry point. The scent of apples fills the air and the poet is drowsing off. Yet the poet cannot rub the strangeness from his sight. He's speaking about that morning when he went to the drinking trough. See, a drinking trough could be any kind of a container which is made usually of leather. It's made of leather or it's made of wood. And the trough would have some kind of, if it's made of wood, you know, there would be some kind of designs. And this would be a container where water is stored. So remember, the poet drinks water not from the tap, he drinks it from the trough. Water is stored in the trough. And on top of the water, he speaks about this pane of glass that he skimmed. Now, you know the word called skimming. Skimming is usually is the kind of action that you do when you take off cream from the milk. So whenever milk is stored in a vessel, it has cream over it, right? The cream that you wouldn't like to drink. We always remove the cream and drink the milk. And the act of removing the cream from the milk is called skimming. So here he says he skimmed a pane of glass. So you can imagine the ice. Remember, the time is winter, and so winter is just coming in. Autumn has already left, kind of gone, and you find this pane of glass is none other than ice that has formed on top of the water. The poet, our apple picker, speaks of how he skimmed this ice from the water and held it like a pane of glass to look at the hoary grass. That is another word that has been used here. Grass, of course, you know. Hoary is a kind of whitish grass, something that is coated with white. And here you know why the white comes, or how the white comes. It's the snow that coats the grass, that covers the grass and makes it look hoary, or it looks like the green grass has suddenly gone white, has suddenly turned grey, as you say, old and hoary. So he speaks about this act of how he looked through the glass of ice, this sheet of ice at the hoary grass, and felt the ice melting. He says he skimmed and held it against. It melted, third stanza. It melted and I let it fall and break. But I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell. And I could tell what from my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear. So he speaks about this glass melting. He let it fall and break. But even before it fell, he says, he was on his way to bed. And he was already asleep before it fell. And he could tell, he knew he was going to dream. I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. He knew he was going to dream, and he also knew what he was going to dream about. Magnified apples appearing and disappearing. Stem end and blossom end. And every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound. It continues. We start from the top. Stem end and blossom end. Now this is the dream that the apple picker knows he will dream of. He speaks about the apple, and when he speaks about the apple, does this look like an apple? So he speaks about the apple and he says, stem end, and if you have seen fresh apples, they would have a kind of flower there at the other end. There would be the stem end that you see here with the leaf, and at the other end you would have the flower of the apple. So stem end and blossom end. Blossom end is the part where you had the flower. That is where you pluck when you pluck the apples or during winter, it withers because the flower falls off, and you just have small, very, very tiny things that hang out from the apple. I don't think we have apples here that would actually have the blossoms attached to it, but in real, for the fresh apples, you always have it. So that is the stem end. So in his dream, he knows, he's sure that he will be watching, or he will be seeing dreams of magnified apples, huge apples with the stem end and the blossom end. Every fleck of russet, fleck is shade. On the apple, of course, you have seen different shades. You have the dark crimson color sometimes at different places. You have a lighter shade of maybe even turning to a yellow on some parts, where you have lighter shades of crimson or russet on other parts. Russet is a color that, this is how it is written, a color that is somewhere between red and brown. So red to brown. So russet is a shade that travels between red and brown. And here you have he says every fleck. Fleck here would mean shade. Fleck of russet. Every fleck meaning every shade of russet showing clear. So his dream would be a very clear dream of magnified apples, russet colored apples with the stem end at times and the blossom end at other times appearing in his dream. He's also conscious of an ache. Ache is a pane that is instep. He says, my instep arch not only keeps the ache. The instep arch again if I draw a foot for you, I don't think this looks like resembles a foot anyway, but what I want to show you is this. This portion that you see here, this is the instep arch. This is the heel, and these are our toes, and this is the instep arch. And you can imagine a person trying to climb a ladder. When you climb the ladder, it is this part of the foot that touches the ladder, right? Where you rest your feet on the ladder. The instep arch, this curved portion here, is where you rest your feet on the ladder. And he says, my instep arch carries the ache. He's been standing on the ladder for hours together, right from morning, standing on, moving the ladder from tree to tree, climbing on it, standing there while he picks the apples from the different branches, the boughs of the apple tree. So he says, my instep arch aches from the pressure it keeps the pressure of the ladder round. It still feels the pressure of standing on the ladder. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin. So he says, while he stands there trying to pick the apples, he would extend his arms beyond reach. Now, every time you cannot keep moving the ladder. When you put the ladder at a certain point, you would pick all the apples that you can that are within your reach, and a little bit that are out of your reach. So he remembers, and then the pressure on his feet would be greater when he stands firmly on the ladder and extends his hand beyond the reach of his hand to pluck the apples that are there. And he says, it keeps the pressure of the ladder round. I feel the ladder sway, and he feels when he extends his arms beyond reach to pluck the apples that are far away, he feels the ladder swaying. Swaying is moving as if it is about to fall. But no, it doesn't. And he says, I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. He says, in the cellar, these barrels are being emptied into the cellar. There might be other people too. And he says, the barrels that he has filled, a barrel would again be a conical kind of a container, something like this, which is again made of wood, which will have designs like this on it. And here he sees apples that are filled full to the brim. So these barrels, so many of them that have been taken away from the tree, from the orchard, to be filled, to be put into the cellar bin where they store the apples. And he says in his dream, he can imagine, he can hear the sound, the rumbling sound. The rumbling is a kind of sound where just before thunder comes, you have a sound that rumbles. It sounds like growling, where just imagine lot of apples being put into a bigger container. So being emptied, when the container is emptied into a bigger container, that would be the sound that the apple picker imagines, or the poet imagines as the rumbling sound. The rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. for I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. There were 10,000 fruit to touch. So he says, I'm overtired, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm washed out. I'm tired of apple picking. He says, I'm overtired, not just tired, but tired beyond measure. What is he tired of? The great harvest I myself desired. This great harvest is picking or cutting anything when it is ripe and ready to eat. You harvest crop, you harvest grain, you harvest wheat, you harvest rice, you harvest maize, you harvest millet, you harvest anything that grows in plenty and anything that is a food item. So usually food items, things that grow as plants are harvested. Harvesting would mean cutting them and getting them ready for consumption to eat. So he speaks about this great harvest. Remember, this I think would be beyond our imagination. We are not very used to see apples growing. We might have seen trees, pictures of apple trees, but it would be difficult to imagine an orchard full of apple trees where we wouldn't be sure about how many apples actually grow on a single tree. There are plenty of them. And a man standing there and picking apples, picking all the possible apples that he can reach from each tree in the orchard is a marathon task. It's a huge task. And this man has come through it. He has completed that task to the best of his satisfaction. You find him having plucked most of the apples from all the trees, but he must have left off a few on certain branches that he couldn't see. So he's so tired of his apple picking. He's exhausted of the number of apples that he's exhausted by the number of apples that he has picked. He's exhausted by the effort of having to stand for so many hours, bearing the pressure on his instep arch. I'm overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. So he calls it a great harvest. This great harvest comes because the number of apples that he had to pick from the trees in the orchard was huge. The number of apples were far beyond the imagination of people, far beyond his own imagination. He still speaks about the number of few apples that he would have left off on the boughs where he couldn't see them. And he says, I desired this great harvest. I wanted to pluck all the apples, pick all the apples from the trees. There were 10,000 fruit to touch. Cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. So this was the effort that he had to make. It was not only standing on the 2-point ladder with the pressure on his instep arch, reaching out for the apples that were beyond his hand's reach. It was also taking each apple so softly and gently that his touch would not hurt it, would not cause any kind of damage to it. And he says, cherish in hand. Cherish is treating something with love and affection. The same way you would look after a little child, a small baby who is given to you, you wouldn't be as careless with it as you are with older people, would you? No, you would take special care of the child, taking care that your fingers and your hands touch it so very gently that it doesn't cry, it is not irritated or hurt from your touch. The same way, this is the same kind of care that is given to the apples. He speaks about taking thousands, 10,000, which may be a huge number. See, he takes each apple in his hand, he touches it so very gently, cherishes it handles it with extreme care and affection, lifts it down, lift down and not let fall. He would take the apple, he would lift it down, put it down without letting any kind of damage happen to it. If it fell, for all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap as of no worth. He says, if I were not doubly careful with this apple, with each apple that I picked, if I let it fall, he says, for all that struck the earth, for every apple that struck the earth, that fell to the ground. Now from this ladder and the apple tree, if he let one apple fall to the earth, maybe it fell onto soft earth, maybe there was grass on the ground, it wouldn't be damaged too much. But yet he says that apple cannot be used. That apple would be removed from the other lot that is meant to be sold in the markets. That apple, he says, no matter if not bruised, bruised is damaged, wounded, bruised, a bruise is a wound. If we fall down somewhere and there is a small kind of wound on our hand or wherever, on our feet, or on our knees or legs or hands, that is called a bruise. A bruise would be red and angry in color with blood showing. So if the apple, even if the apple is not bruised or spiked with stubble, stubble is the small stones, the small pieces of sand that are there on the ground. So even if the apple is not spiked, when the apple falls on the ground, it could be damaged with the stones and the pieces of sand there. The apple could be damaged. So he says, even if that hasn't happened, even if it has fallen on grass or on soft earth, he says, the apple would not be used for sale. It would surely go to the cider apple heap as of no worth. It would be useless. Go to the cider apple heap. So you have barrels of apples being filled on one side, and any apple that falls down, as the poet said right now, that falls down, that cannot be used further, cannot be used for sale, goes to the cider apple heap. There is another heap of apples. You can just imagine heaps of apples that are there, apples that have fallen down and cannot be, maybe damaged a little, that cannot be used. So you have a heap of such apples. So any apple that misses the touch, that misses the catch, or which the poet cannot catch, cannot cherish, cannot lovingly put into the barrel, goes into the cider apple heap. What is cider? It is a kind of, what they do with the apples, the wounded, the bruised, damaged apples, is either make vinegar or wine. Cider apple here would most probably be wine that is made out of the apples, or even vinegar. So anything other than selling it. One can see, and as of no worth, those apples are damaged, useless. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck would say whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. One can see what will trouble the sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. He says, I'm going to sleep. That's how he began the poem. And here he says, I don't know whether I'll be able to sleep comfortably. Will my sleep be like the sleep of the woodchuck, whatever sleep it is? Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep. The woodchuck that hibernates, you know about hibernation. When the winter comes, there are certain birds that migrate, that move away to different other warmer places, and there are animals that bury themselves under the ground to hibernate. That's called hibernation, and they remain there for the next few months, for the next 2 or 3 months, while the climate becomes warmer and they feel more comfortable to come out into the open. So he speaks about the woodchuck that with his sleep of hibernation or any other human sleep. He says, am I going to sleep a human sleep, or am I going to sleep the sleep of the woodchuck which hibernates? So this is the note on which Robert Frost ends the poem. What is the poem about? We spoke about, or rather we see this beautiful orchard with beautiful trees, this picture of redness, the picture of greenery. It's a beautiful picture of nature that Robert Frost creates for us. And we enjoy this. We are happy in this orchard. We are happy in this apple orchard, looking at the number of trees, picking apples along with the apple picker, picking all those apples, handling them carefully, lovingly, transferring them to the barrels that are reserved for them. Maybe a barrel or two is left unfilled. Maybe a few apples are left unpicked. But whatever apples have been picked have been handled lovingly. Those that have missed the human hands, those that have fallen down on the ground, have been transferred to this heap of apples that are meant to make something like vinegar or wine. And the apple picker is tired of the marathon effort that he has taken, tired from his feet standing on the rungs of the ladder. He wants to sleep. He's exhausted. And in this sleep of exhaustion, the question he asks is, what kind of a sleep am I going to get? Am I going to sleep the sleep of humans? Am I going on a long sleep, the sleep of hibernation, where I won't be alive to the world? I will be, when you hibernate, you are lost to the world. The animals that hibernate do not come out for months. And people would think that they have disappeared or that they are dead. So am I going to sleep that kind of a sleep, the sleep of hibernation? Well, this poem by Robert Frost does not give a conclusive answer. It does not tell us what exactly the poet wants us to think. He does not direct our thoughts to certain fixed points or fixed perspectives. He's opening the poem for us to take our own stand, to take our own perspective and imagine or connect ourselves with this picture that he is drawing for us, this picture of the apples. And here you could say, when the poem begins, there is an anxious note where the poet is anxious as to whether he has picked all the apples. He is anxious that he wants to stop. He's so anxious that he wants to stop the job of apple picking and move on to take some kind of rest, move on to take some kind of, go into a kind of sleep that will take him away from the mundane activity of picking apples. The activity is monotonous. The activity is mundane. It will tire you out. It did tire away the poet. But at the same time, he has the satisfaction of having done what he had desired to do. He had desired this harvest, and he has achieved it. So there is a kind of joy, a satisfaction of having achieved something, but at the same time, there is the exhaustion, the kind of fatigue that comes from a job, a very difficult job. And here there are a lot of critics who would read meanings into this poem. The effort of standing on a ladder for hours together, the effort of your feet balancing themselves on the rungs of the ladder, the pain that comes from such a position, all that could be symbolic, taken symbolically, where you could speak of the act of creation. There are critics who attribute, who say that the act of apple picking resembles the act of poetic creation, where intense efforts at expressing oneself, intense efforts or anxious thoughts about self-expression torture the mind of the artist, trouble him, where the artist constantly staggers, constantly loses balance, loses his sense of peace, continuously thinking thoughts that he would like to, forming subjects that he would like to express. So the anxious thoughts about life, anxious thoughts about the uncertainties of existence could all be a kind of symbolic extension of the act of apple picking. The monotonous act of apple picking could be the monotonous, the continuous, never-ending task of composing something, composing a work of art. It might produce result, it might not produce result. As the apple picker says, some apples could go for sale, while certain other apples would be damaged and would go into the cider heap. He talks about the effort, yet the satisfaction, yet the intense exhaustion that this effort or this apple picking, this task of apple picking has brought him into. So it is a kind of repeated task, monotonous task, and that is life too for most of us, for many of us. Life is a kind of monotony, is a kind of repetitive exercise. And in this repetitive exercise, you would either attain the satisfaction of creation, of having created or done something extraordinary, or you could fall into the cider apple heap and be transported for some other purpose. So the pressures and pains of the creative purpose, process, the pressures and pains of living life with all its complexities, with all its different uncertainties, trials, tribulations, travails, all the different pains that come and attack you as you move forward in life. This could be the message that Frost wants to give us. The pane of ice through which you look at the hoary grass where you have every aspect of nature covered with snow, which shows that you cannot see things as directly as you always want to. In winter and autumn, the grass would not look green, it would look white. So that is a different perspective. So the varying perspectives that the poet would want to bring to us through this image of beauty, this image of pleasure, of the pleasure of creating or of gathering apples, and the pleasure of having worked to one's utmost satisfaction. All those are pleasures, but at the same time, there is this question of whether this pleasure was worth the pain. He wanted the harvest, but was it worth all the immense exhaustion and the fatigue that the apple picker feels at the end of the process? And he's getting ready for a sleep. Is it the sleep of exhaustion, a human sleep, that is the sleep wherein you will wake up after a few hours? Or is it the sleep of hibernation? Or is it death? The question is not answered by the poet, but is left to us to decide, to analyze, and to imagine. So this is our poem, After Apple Picking. The poem has a rhyme of its own. If you look at the lines, I'll just read 3 lines for you so that you can get an idea. The first stanza for you to get an idea of the rhymes. My long 2-point ladder's ticking through a tree toward heaven still, and there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3. So you see the tree, the still, the fill, the 3. Apples I didn't pick upon some bough, but I'm done with apple picking now. The bough and the now. So you have the tree, the still, the fill, the 3, the bough and the now. Those are rhymes where words resemble each other by way of pronunciation and create a music of their own. That is rhyme. And the meter that this poem uses is the iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is a meter where you have unstressed syllables followed by stressed syllables. So this poem follows a strict iambic pentameter. Iambic meter lines. Iambus or iamb is the sound of the horse's hooves. So you have the horse's hooves going. So where you have a low and a high, a low and a high. So you have the unstressed syllable followed by the stressed syllable. So this is how the poem proceeds. So the meter that the poet uses is the iambic pentameter, and the rhyme, the poet also uses rhyme in order to decorate his poem. So this is After Apple Picking for you. Thank you.